Hi, everyone. We're going to be taking notes today on ecology on page 59, free choice output on page 60. Take a moment to write that down. Pause the video if you need to. So flipping to pages 59, go ahead and head your paper ecology notes. We're going to start with the definition of ecology. You've probably heard the prefix eco before, and you've probably heard the suffix ology before. So breaking that down, we're going to do the study of, which is that ology suffix, like biology, zoology, etc. The study of the interactions. Just a keyword, so I'm going to underline that. Interactions between living and non-living things. I hate that word because it's so non-specific, but essentially it's living organisms and non-living things. So in science, and we talked about this at the very, very beginning of the year, so if you don't remember it, that's okay. But we often refer to living as biotic and non-living as abiotic organisms, abiotic and biotic. So as you know, the environment, the ecosystem, it kind of works off of one another. Without the sun and the soil and the oxygen and the carbon dioxide and all those abiotic factors, biotic things could not exist. And so it's all interacting and interplaying with one another. You've probably heard of the concept of photosynthesis and cellular, just how important it is that plants create oxygen for us. And obviously we also take that oxygen, turn it into carbon dioxide, which plants use to keep making us oxygen. So everything out there is kind of like that. It's a cycle and it all plays off of one another. We're going to talk about the levels of how that's all organized. So within ecology, it's called the levels of organization. There's so many fields that have levels of organization. This is the levels of organization within ecology. Earlier on in the year, we talked about the levels of organization within the human body. This is a different level of organization. So I want you to lay out your notes into 3 columns. We're going to have the level, leave a little space, weirdly straight line, pretty proud of that. Definition, probably going to leave the most space for that. 2 for 2. And then you're going to draw a picture to go with that. Okay. There's 5 levels of organization that we're going to talk about. So the first one is organism. So we're just going to be starting with the lowest level of living or biotic organisms, and then they'll kind of get intertwined. So a single organism is an individual living thing. So it's not referring to a single non-living, it's a single living thing. So I could have my dog Biscuit and he's an organism. I'm an organism. A bug is an organism. A plant is an organism. It's a single living thing. It could be a bacteria. Bacteria could be an organism. You're going to draw a picture to represent an organism. Doesn't matter to me what type of organism you use. I'm going to draw another line. Then I'm going to do population. You've heard this word before. If I say, what's the population of orangutans in the forest in this area of the world? I don't know why I'm talking like that, but I'm talking about how many of that organism, of that same species, are in that region. We can also say, what's the population on the planet, right? The biosphere. So a population is actually a group of the same species. In an area. That area could be as small as a single petri dish on a microscope or on a single slide of the microscope, all the way up to the whole world, right? We can kind of roughly estimate the population of humans on the planet. But we could also break that down to just in North America or just in Seattle. Draw a picture of a population. So whatever you did for organism, you might just choose to continue that and draw a group of them. You could keep it simple too if you're not a famous artist or super artistic. Don't feel like you got to do anything fancy for these. Then community. This word gets used a lot in schools and in other settings, just to imply like everyone coming together, diverse groups working together. That's kind of like what it is in science, except it's talking about multiple species, living species in a single area. So I could say the community, like the community of living organisms in the Pacific Northwest. I could look at that lens. So that's all the living organisms, right? So group of all the biotic or living species in one area. So I could go to Pack Forest near Mount Rainier and I could say, what are all the species that make up the community in that area? And I could make a list of all the mushrooms and trees and types of lichen and mammals, birds, etc., etc. And I could say that's the community. That's that community is that collection. So it just includes the living, though. One organism, groups of the same types of organisms, all the different organisms in an area. Then, you probably guessed it, all the biotic and abiotic. So that's going to be what we call the ecosystem. You've probably heard that before. Ecosystem is important because it balances off of each other and it's a cycle, and you can remove one piece of an ecosystem and the whole thing could fall apart. A keystone species, which is essentially a really important species, like a bee. Bees are very important. You could take that out of an ecosystem and it could really fall apart. So ecosystems have this like delicate balance to them, but they essentially are all the living or biotic and non-living. Let's call it, let's stick with things. In an area. So again, if I go to Pack Forest and I'm looking at this community of living species, I could also factor in what the ecosystem is like there. I could think about the air quality. I could think about the water quality. I could think about what nutrients are in the soil, how much sunlight it gets in that ecosystem, what infrastructure, what buildings have been built there that have maybe gotten rid of some of the diversity or changed the ecosystem. So ecosystem is delicate, and that's important to know. Go ahead and draw a picture. So that's living and non-living things in an area. And biome is a greater area. So it's really like a major region. Um, Characterized by um, the features of that area. And that's all the features. That's taking into consideration everything, and it's looking at a global scale. So there's tons of different types of biomes. You've heard of them before: deserts, tundras, uh, rainforest, tropical rainforest and temperate rainforest, which is a lot of what Washington has. Um, there's all kinds of biome areas, and you could look at a global map of how the biomes are divided. And you could break that down by ecosystem, communities, populations, and organisms. And that's kind of why it builds to this. Technically, there's one more. If you don't have room for it, that's okay. But let's squeeze it in because I have room for it. A collection of all the biomes is called the biosphere. Our biosphere is our good old Earth. Sphere, meaning spherical shape. All the living sphere. That's basically what it means. But it's a collection of all the biomes and how they interact. Right. So we could compare our biosphere to a biosphere of Mars or another planet. And then the picture of that one's pretty obvious, some kind of planet picture. That's it. Okay, those are the levels of organization. We could break this apart and obviously study this extensively, but I think that you get the gist. You've probably heard all of these words before, so I'm not going to spend too much more time on that. I do, however, want to offer you free choice here. This is a good one for the mnemonic. So if you really like creating little sentences to help you remember stuff, this is a good one for the mnemonic. But you can do any of the free choice options on page 1 in your notebook. So if you do the mnemonic, you could do the letters O, P, C, E, B, B from the notes, the levels of organization, and make a sentence and then draw a picture to go with it. If you choose to do that, make sure you're doing that picture component and you're also explaining a sentence summary of that. Okay, that's everything. Thank you for listening.